Long live history. Guys, they just brought this gentleman home and buried him 5 years ago. He's buried in Morganza Cemetery here in St. Mary's County. He died on the Oklahoma on the first day of the first war that killed more people than disease. In World War I, 55% of the United States soldiers died of Spanish flu, which is basically the same thing we have now. The French and Indian War, Fort Frederick is only 3 miles off of the interstate if you're ever headed up north of Hagerstown. Absolutely beautiful. It was the furthest western point in the United States. And the most feared soldiers during the French and Indian War were the hunting shirts from Maryland, they used to call them. The name on our quarter is the Old Line State. And just a note of trivia, Maryland does not have one natural lake. Everything is made by beavers. But that's just a trivia point. I was meant to show it on the first slide. So holding the line of battle is the way we got the name the Old Line State on our quarter. Has nothing to do with Mason or Dixon. It's the first battle of the American Revolution. They were led by General William Smallwood from Charles County. He happened to be on court-martial duty the day the Battle of Brooklyn happened, so he did not have to watch his soldiers slaughtered. We re-recruited. We got sent south as members of the Continental Army, saved 3 more battles for the United States. We lost 600 of the Maryland Brigade just at the Battle of Camden alone. Both General Smallwood and General Gist were at Yorktown. Gist is a name you'll hear quite a bit. His father was actually in charge of the Western hunting shirts. A famous picture of General George Washington, obviously. In the middle is Marquis de Lafayette, 20-year-old. His parents tell him he cannot go fight in the American Revolution. He buys a ship. He can't get in anywhere but Charleston, South Carolina. Buys a horse, starts riding north to find General Washington. On the right, we have a gentleman who owns a little island out in the Chesapeake Bay. His name is Tench Tillman. He volunteered for the entire war. We gave him the honorary rank of colonel. I thank God a lady who's now passed from St. Mary's County finally gave us the credit we are due. The Battle of Brooklyn and the sacrifice of the Maryland soldiers was one paragraph in a 500-page Revolutionary War book. Linda Reno, Godspeed, she well-researched it and gave the Maryland soldiers their due. We're going to pretend like so George Washington, when he got to Bunker Hill, 3 days later, he wasn't so fascinated that here comes the Maryland boys that have just marched from Fort Frederick to Boston in 22 days. He's fascinated with these little silver things hanging off our belts. We're the only militia company with bayonets in the country. A year later, his first time in charge of an actual battle, and we are in Brooklyn, New York. George Washington, the British know what they're doing. They've done an all-night march. There's 17,000 British, all with bayonets. Least of the problem, 17,000 more Hessians down in the middle guarding the cannons. The Maryland 400 under Lord Sterling, turned and attacked the most strong part of the British line, the Hessians guarding the cannons. Now, mind you, they make 3 times as much if we're dead. They were mercenaries. They didn't want live prisoners to free. 6 times 400 Maryland boys formed up and attacked the Hessians. The British thought they'd walked into a trap and basically stopped their attack, allowing the American army to escape. Every time the smoke would clear, George Washington was crying, watching the sacrifice of the Maryland soldiers. My God, what brave boys I must lose today. An exact quote from General Washington with tears coming down his face. He would have been hung in the morning. The Maryland boys held the line of battle. 9 out of 400 came out, including future General Gist, who is now only a colonel, Mordecai Gist. 9 out of 400, the Old Line State is for holding the line of battle, Brooklyn, New York. I'm skipping between the wars. This is General James Wilkinson. He's from Benedict, Maryland. He is the highest ranking traitor we've ever had in the United States Army. He was fortunately not caught till after he was dead. He was a spy for Spain, and he was also involved with Aaron Burr, I do believe, in the trying to snag the Louisiana Purchase. This is General Leonard Covington. He's from Aquasco. He's a general during 1812, and he dies because the New York militia will not cross the river and fight out of state and fight in Canada. So they go into Canada and invade Canada with 1/3 as many soldiers as were available. He has 21 counties and towns named after him, and he's from Aquasco, Maryland. This is Joshua Barney. Imagine the first USS Hornet. Here, sir. Even though you're only 17, here's the first USS Hornet. You are now the captain. Once they put out to sea, they backed him down to lieutenant. And he actually fought 26 battles in defense of our freedom between both the Revolutionary War and the War of 1812. He's the one who came down here and saved the Southern Maryland turnip patches, as President Madison used to refer to us. Stephen Decatur Jr. He was the one when, from the shores of Tripoli, during the Barbary Pirates War, we had our biggest warship captured, the Philadelphia, a brand new major warship, and it runs aground. The Barbary pirates snag it. He sneaks into the most defended harbor in the world of Tripoli and burns our biggest liability that pirates now have. There were 60,000 United States troops during the Civil War. Baltimore was the second largest embarkation point behind Ellis Island in the United States. And the exact same thing happened there that would have happened in the gangs in New York, where the United States recruiters were sitting right at the bottom of the exit ramps for the ships coming over from Germany and from Ireland. John Kinley here is a Mexican war hero. Aside from that, there's no, West Point or anything. He is in charge of the 1st Maryland U.S. Twice the Maryland Yankees fought the Maryland Confederates. The first time he was in charge of the Maryland Yankees was at Front Royal, and he went on to have a distinguished career. This guy is who I wanted to be. General Ward, he's a West Pointer. He's stationed out in Washington State, and the Indians there are very passive. He gets transferred called east when the war starts, and leaves Fort Vancouver, stops off at a little place called the Hornet's Nest on his way east, and ends up in 1864 when Stonewall's Old Corps was coming around to attack Washington, D.C., and General Grant was pulling troops from Petersburg. There is nobody I would rather have in charge of the nation's capital defense than General Ward, a quote. Our first patients at our hospital 6 miles from here were from Pittsburgh Landing, by the way. General William French, a West Pointer from Baltimore. He is the one who flanked Crompton's Pass and made the South Mountain passes untenable, so the Confederates had to retreat back to Sharpsburg. 2 days later, he leads the attack on the sunken road 8 times. This is Admiral John Rogers. There were no admirals until 1862. We did not want to seem like the British. The first one, there was only Commodore before that. The first admiral posthumously was John Paul Jones. John Rogers is from Haverty Grace. His father was a Commodore in 1812. His grandfather was a Commodore in Revolution. He is the first of 5 future generations of Admiral John Rogers from Haverty Grace, Maryland. 7 generations of the top rank of the U.S. Navy. General James Cooper from Frederick, he's the one who started the Maryland militia for the Civil War, the Maryland Union troops he started organizing. We know that over half the people in the war died of disease, dysentery, and diarrhea. Didn't care what rank you were, didn't care where you were. It came and found you. My claim to fame, Dan Toomey, who along with Donald Showman, is responsible for all the knowledge that you are hearing tonight. Dan Toomey's given a talk in Baltimore. There were 2 volunteers from St. Mary's County, 1 from Charles, 2 from PG, and none from Calvert. One of the guys from PG missed all his buddies, so he deserted to Virginia. He's taking questions at the end. I thank the kids with the phones. Sir, there were 2 people fighting from PG County. One of them's grandfather signed our Declaration of Independence from Carrollton. General Spriggs Carroll never left the U.S. Army, led the 8th Ohio, who flanked the sunken road. And also, besides that, Montgomery County had 7 volunteers. Anne Arundel County, 70. There were about 2,000 total from the Eastern Shore that volunteered for the United States. We had 16 Confederate generals. This is General Charles Sidney Winder. He was the first one that got killed. Stonewall Jackson's right-hand man. Our governor's son was in the Stonewall Brigade from the day the war started. General Lewis Little from Baltimore is killed a month later. This is September 1862, the Battle of Iuka in Mississippi. We're trying to take back a vital railhead. 3 different Confederate corps are supposed to attack from 3 different points of the compass. And at 5 o'clock in the afternoon, one of the Washington, D.C. two incompetent Confederate generals never moved his troops. General Little catches a sniper's bullet between the eyes. We talked about Tillman's Island earlier. General Lloyd Tillman, West Pointer, killed at the Battle of Champion Hill in Mississippi. He was in charge of the 3rd Maryland, was also the only Maryland Confederate unit that served out west, and he was in charge of them, and he died. His son was coming up. His son was a dispatch rider, and he died right in front of his son's eyes. I do a private literacy campaign where I loan my collection out to libraries. The man from Hartford Library, who was in charge at the time, comes up and says to me, it's my day off. I heard you were here picking this up. I want to thank you. More people have been in 30 days than have in the 30 years. Who knew General James J. Archer, the most fighting brigade in the Confederate Army, was from Bel Air, Maryland? Let's start there. Over half of our generals never met Robert E. Lee unless they were in the old Army. They served out west where there was a better chance of promotion. He was leading Tennessee. He was a lawyer from Princeton, leading Tennessee, Texas, and Kentucky troops. Gets shipped east, and Robert E. Lee finds one of his most valuable assets. He was also the first of Lee's generals to be captured at first day of Gettysburg. And they froze him and starved him for a year on Johnson's Island. They let him go, and he died within a month. General John Winder died February the 6th, 1865, of a heart attack. It's a good thing he did. His father was the general in charge of the War of 1812 Bladensburg races, and he died of a heart attack. He would have probably been in trouble because he was in charge of the entire Confederate prison system. Our last general to die. Now remember, General Johnston, and there's no telegraphs going to nowhere in Georgia. I'm sorry, West Point, Georgia. It's a small medical recuperation hospital. His engineers told him to burn these 2 houses as the Yankees were coming. He says, my friends live in those houses. A sniper from one of those houses killed him an hour later, and an hour after that, the Yankees tore the houses down to build a bridge. He was our last general to die. Our top-ranking general, Major General Isaac Tremble, he was a West Pointer. At the bottom of Culp's Hill, he threw his hat on the ground and told the 2nd Washington, D.C. general to stick it, that he would never listen to another order from him in his life. It goes to Robert E. Lee, who assigns him 5,000 people. The left wing of Pickett's charge the next day, where he lost his leg and spent the rest of the war in Johnson's Island. General Arnold Elzey, this is a very rare photograph. At Gaines Mill in 1862, a bullet goes through his jaw and comes out of his ear. Every other picture you see, this is in his general's uniform, and it's after he's been shot. Every other picture, he is looking this direction. And they put him in charge of the defenses of Richmond after that wounding. General George Hume Stewart, they called him Maryland Stewart so he wouldn't get confused with Jeb Stuart. He ended up inheriting the Maryland Brigade at the bottom of Culp's Hill when Trumbull said goodbye. From hero to zero, General Bradley T. Johnson. You saw we were the right flank of Stonewall Jackson's army from the very day one. And it's because of this gentleman's wife. She was from North Carolina. She goes down, comes back with 500 Mississippi rifles, bayonets. The ladies from Richmond pay for all our camping equipment, everything. And she takes a second trip. There's 1,000 soldiers with the exact same ammunition wagon, put the Marylanders on the right flank. And that's how we ended up being the right flank of Stonewall Jackson's army. After the 1-year enlistments were up, everybody up in Harper's Ferry signed a 1-year enlistment. Most of the people in Richmond and Fredericksburg signed 3-year enlistments. You'll see why that comes in later. But after that 1-year enlistment were up, about a third went into the cavalry, a third went into the artillery, and a third stayed in the infantry. Bradley Johnson becomes the head of the Maryland Cavalry. We get chased after we go up and burn Chambersburg, Pennsylvania for 250 miles. And the Yankees sent Jesse Scouts, Confederates, or Yankees dressed in Confederate uniforms, took our pickets, surrounded our cavalry, and came in on them at daybreak from 360 degrees. Half of them got out alive, and he was one of them. He got sentenced to serve as the commandant of Salisbury, North Carolina prison, where 45 U.S. colored troops died mysteriously the same night of lead poisoning. They were all from Maryland. General William Mackel, one of the 5 Eastern Shore Confederate generals, the West Pointer. He was in charge of Island Number 10. Charles County, Maryland. Boy, what bragging rights they have. General Joseph Lancaster Brent a West Pointer, in charge of 1,000 cavalry horses out in the Western Theater, and he sinks a full-on U.S. ironclad. How do you do that with 1,000 cavalry horses? You're in the Red River, you capture 2 schooners, you put pop guns, field guns on them, and you start chasing an ironclad down the Red River. It runs itself aground, blows itself up. Joseph Lancaster Brent also surrendered the last army of the Confederate States of America. He was in the Western Theater and surrendered it for Kirby Smith. Our first of Washington, D.C.'s 2 incompetents. He's the West Pointer. He was in charge of New Orleans. They had no choice but to evacuate New Orleans. There's the entire Union Navy sitting in front of them. It's a wooden city. He has 1,800 effective rifles or guns, and they have 30,000 U.S. soldiers. But less than a year later, he was the one who never moved his corps at the Battle of Iuka, which is now Corinth, Mississippi. The second of Washington, D.C.'s 2 incompetents, and I'm including these because these are old Maryland families. General Richard Ewell, he took over Stonewall's position. 2 battles later, Robert E. Lee had had enough of him and replaced him. The first blockade runner ever caught during the Civil War was not the Dove, but a couple things. My last talk was to the Boy Scouts. The big white puffy clouds in the background, cumulus clouds, 750,000 pounds on average. Also, we're getting ready to talk about a lot of firsts. I forgot all the first when we were back in the Revolutionary War. The first Pony Express from Point Lookout to the War Department, 8 hours, Revolutionary War. The first battle of the Revolutionary War, St. George's Island. Who would have ever guessed? Stop and read the little history sign. The history sign is wrong. Actually, my good friend Donald Showman, who's written 20 history books, including his latest one, The Anaconda's Tale. Do you have that? This is a shameless plug from my friend, but this is all about the Civil War in Southern Maryland. It's called The Anaconda's Tale. And if anybody doesn't know him, this is Donald Showman, Dr. Ushelman from started the Maritime Museum. And this is well worth reading. It's heavy to hold, but it's well worth reading. He just put it out. It is the most detailed book about the Civil War in Southern Maryland. So, the first propeller-driven ship that ever sank in the world sank in Leonardtown. 1825, the Housatonic sank in 1833, sank and burned in Leonardtown. The very first blockade runner that was ever caught during the war was coming out of Breton Bay, and it was Somerset, and it was caught by the USS Resolute coming out of Breton Bay. So that was the first blockade runner caught. The Confederate States Navy, Franklin Buchanan, is 5th in line when the Civil War starts. This is a tale of 2 commodores. This is one of them. Franklin Buchanan sends his letter of resignation in a week after Fort Sumter, goes home, his wife beats him. He goes back 2 days later and says, "I'd like my letter back. I threw my retirement away." Another commodore from Maryland did the same thing. Goes back 2 days later. They both had been accepted. Thank you. Commodore Franklin Buchanan goes south. He had a personal relationship with President Jefferson Davis because President Davis was the head of the Secretary of War when the Naval Academy started. Franklin Buchanan was a big factor in starting it and also the first superintendent. So they had a good friendship. Commodore Isaac Mayo from Mayo, Maryland, when he found out his letter had been accepted, it really was tough decisions. He went home and shot himself that night. And nobody knew this until Joyce Bennett just wrote a book. I'll plug your book also, Joyce. What was the name of it? I'm sorry. Maryland, My Maryland. How could I forget? That's it. I'm pleased to have so many history authors here. Admiral Raphael Sims, Charles County, Maryland, Charlotte Hall Military Academy, sank more ships than anybody else in the history of mankind for surface raider. There were some U-boats that sank more. But he was captain of the CSS Alabama. The man who should have run the Confederate Navy by the old Navy rankings was this gentleman from downtown Helen, Maryland. Next time you're going out Route 5 north of Leonardtown, when you go past the Helen corner, you'll see Forest Farms on the left, Commodore French Forrest. Number 4 in the Confederate Navy, we're not bragging, in charge of the Mississippi River from the time the war started until we had a Navy in the Mississippi River. Next time you're going around Baltimore, Commodore George B. Hollins, Hollins Ferry Road. Number 5 in the Confederate Navy, we're adopting him. He was a North Carolinian by birth, but he was a Annapolis professor, married an Annapolis woman and is buried in Annapolis. He's in charge of the CSS Shenandoah. He has the record for the second most ships ever sunk by anybody that lived on Earth, and he's sitting there looking at 29 whaling ships in the Barents Sea. I'm going to be past Sims's record by tonight. The captain rose up to him with a newspaper, hands him a San Francisco and a New York newspaper. Waddell orders all his cannons thrown overboard, sails around the world, surrenders in Liverpool 6 months after General Lee. Right behind him, also from Annapolis, his grandfather was President of the United States, also an instructor at the Academy, John Taylor Wood. He sank 42 ships wearing a Confederate uniform. The head of the Confederate Marine Corps, Colonel Lloyd Beale, Tacoma Park, Maryland. The head of the Confederate Secret Service, we all know lawyers are sneaky. The man had no military experience whatsoever as a lawyer from Glendon, Maryland, ends up running the Confederate Secret Service. This is basically shows how confused our state was. This is the son of a Union general, just graduated from Harvard, could walk on his father's staff making $600 a month that you can actually spend, but he signs up as a private in the Confederate Army. Makes it to Fisher's Hill, which is, by the way, the same battle the two boys died that are buried in Morganza, and dies on Fisher's Hill 6 months before the end of the war. My first history talk was not until 6 years ago. The lady from Cambridge, she was just waiting for me. I was ambushed. The lady from the Historical Society at Dorchester, she knew I was setting up my collection. It goes to Cambridge every 2nd January, and I'm just ambushed. Ma'am, I will come give you a talk on Dorchester Confederates. I have 2 racetracks, so I'm not busy right now. I'll do the research, and I'll come give you a talk. I'm not going to tell you why until the last sentence of the talk, though. And so this is Culp's Hill. Second time the Marylanders have fought the Marylanders. Trimble's throwing his hat on the ground, and we received 47% casualties this day. We're fighting the Maryland Yankees for the second time. The first Maryland Eastern Shore is at the top of Culp's Hill. This is a Zouave from New York. They were next to the Marylanders, just overlooking the carnage. Now, they helped the wounded. They buried the mascot, the company dog, and they left the dead right where they fell, on the side of Culp's Hill. These are Marylanders, 2 Marylanders, by the way. And right here is the first Maryland Eastern Shore on top of Culp's Hill. And sitting on that horse right there is Colonel James Wallace. He's in a blue uniform. He's fighting for the United States Army, and he owns 48 slaves. And he's from your hometown. You all were very confused, and that's the way I did my very first history talk 6 years ago. Colonel James Wallace. There were about 2,000 Eastern Shore Yankees that volunteered. I usually do these talks when my collection's at a library. People often ask me, what is the coolest thing you've ever found? And it's not the Point Lookout ring. It has nothing to do with anything I've ever found that's in my collection. This gentleman, the very last page, 2,400 pages, 6 volumes on Confederate generals. I take sleeping pills because my pain level is so bad. I'm like, come on, smack myself. You're reading what you're reading. I get up, I go run and grab the book of 22,000 Marylanders that fought for the Confederacy. And lo and behold, guess who's not in it? Trans-Mississippi Journal. After Vicksburg fell, Kirby Smith out west could make his own journals. There were 24 of them. This gentleman was from Baltimore, went to the Oxford, Maryland Military Academy, and was a Trans-Mississippi General for a grand total of 10 days before the war ended. General Levin M. Lewis, our 16th and final Confederate general. These are some of the photos out of my collection. This is Private Henry Ford. He's from Leonardtown. Private Joseph F. Stone, a good friend of mine, Rob Long, just wrote a book on St. Mary's County Confederates. There was no known picture of his his ancestor. And lo and behold, I called him and said, young man, you're not going to believe what I have in my hand. And I handed that to him. This gentleman, read the bottom. Turbocharged love, that's what I call our love for our children. And I can't even imagine being his mother. Here's Robert Black, or Lieutenant Blackistone. We had 2 soldiers from Maryland. The day after Fort Sumter at West Point, they took everybody in the chapel and said, you put your hand on the Bible and swear an oath of allegiance to the United States. The 2 Maryland cadets said, read between the lines. This was one of them. His ancestor owned where the college is now in Leonardtown, down to Leonard Hall. That was his plantation. And when his son died, he packed up and moved to Baltimore. And that was also a block of stone from the 1634 family. John Alexander Hayden died on Culp's Hill, unmarked, buried there. This is Private Thomas Murray, and the reason I brought him up earlier, you heard me talk about the 3-year and the 1-year enlistments. Marylanders, everybody badmouths us. There was such a bad problem with what they call desertion. The guys who signed up for the 3-year enlistments in Richmond and in Fredericksburg, at the end of those 3 years, the Confederate Supreme Court said, you guys are free to go. The governor's son deserted. You're not deserting when you are free to go, according to the Supreme Court of the Confederate States of America. Sgt Peter Butler, my brother here from my hometown, we're the only Leonardtown in the world. He cost me a lot of money. His quill pen is running out of ink. I've never seen a black soldier from Michigan yet. They had him listed on the auction site as Leonardtown, Michigan. Also from Leonardtown, I wish to heck I owned this photograph. By the way, there were 19 Medal of Honors given out to U.S. colored troops. 2 of them came to St. Mary's County. That's a pretty good average. Sergeant Harris here from Leonardtown won his at Petersburg. From Hollywood, we have Private Henry Barnes. He won his at, I believe, Chafin's Farm. All I'm going to say is the 7th District boys know how to drive boats. This is a white sailor who entered the United States Navy in New York 6 months before, when they were paying $300 for sign here. And 6 months later, they hand him the Medal of Honor down at Fort Fisher in North Carolina. This is also part of my collection. This is a cartridge box that was in a museum in Sharpsburg from the end of the war until the Great Depression. It went into private hands. Donald Choman and I think Dr. Eshelman were both at my party 15 years ago. A lady from the Historical Society says, Mr. Beasley, you're looking at these initials completely upside down. They used to put bottoms on their T's. 2 seconds later, we find out the guy's from Great Mills. He's buried unmarked at Pax. Our flag was designed our current flag, this was designed in 1781 by the 5th Maryland Guard, which were mostly ex-Confederates. And in 1903, a dignitary standing next to a foreign dignitary's wife from overseas, standing next to our governor's wife. Boy, that looked like a really nice state flag if it didn't have that big number 5 on it. And they, within a year, that's our state flag. A woman's work can get done in a hurry. If you're interested, all the historical flags are available. All you have to do is go on and Google Maryland historical flags. During the Revolution, we were the only state, I believe, who got our own flag, the Cowpens flag, for our bravery at the Battle of Camden, I believe, was where we got that from. Anybody have questions?
So how long have you been collecting, John?
How long have I been collecting? My father, who passed away when I was 9 years old, actually spurred my history, telling me about his grandfather and his great-grandfather. And so he dragged me to many battlefields before he passed. That started my love of it, and I've just started collecting. I don't know, life's been good to me. I started a racetrack when I was in high school, and it's done well. Yes, Miss Joyce Bennett.
First of all, this is really great, and it will be on YouTube.
I'm hoping they will put it up on YouTube for me.
Yes, I meant to bring...
Maryland Military History it will be on.
Well, wonderful information. I was wondering, had you heard of the French lady, Richard Thomas Sorbonne?
Our famous, most crazy person to think he could sneak back and do it 6 months later.
And then there was a Ridgeway who perished on the Hunley.
On the Hunley? Oh, yes, the guy from the Eastern Shore.
Eastern Shore.
Yes,
so
I do remember
that.
And there is a lot of brother versus brother. I forgot to mention this. Franklin Buchanan comes out on the CSS Virginia. What's the first ship he's looking to sink? The USS Congress, but the Cumberland is closer, and he has to sink the Cumberland so they can't ram him from behind. And the reason he was so hot on the Congress, his brother was the paymaster on the Congress. That is brother against brother.
And one more thing, on the 60,000 number, that's really something that really could be studied. It was very interesting. 25% were Germans and Irish. A whole bunch of them were Pennsylvanians.
Yes,
New
you're right about
Yorkers,
that, exactly.
Folks, because we weren't meeting the quota. We were a
Exactly.
modified state. They brought them down and designated them. But anyway, fantastic
Just
information.
One little note, Maryland, Virginia, and not Virginia, Maryland, D.C., Washington, D.C., federal territory did not free their slaves until 1 year after Fort Sumter. But we were the only 3 states that got paid for our slaves, only for the males, half of what they were worth, and you had to let them join the U.S. Army. And
We were the first state to free the slaves.
what was that?
Maryland was the first state to free the slaves by constitutional.
You're right. When they first voted on that 1864 Constitution, it failed radically. It was 24%. I think it got like less than 100 votes in St. Mary's County to free the slaves. Now, mind you, you had to be white and you had to be a landowner and a man to vote. It was amazing, though, when you think about everything that was stacked against us.
It was one of the first times where soldiers were allowed to vote, even though they weren't from the state.
Yes,
If they had occupied Maryland for 6 months,
exactly.
the governor said you could vote, and it only passed by the 250
263
and
votes.
It was all
Yeah.
soldier votes that changed.
Exactly. I mean, from 24% to passing by 263. And here's something that throws everybody. The 13th Amendment freed the slaves everywhere in the United States. That didn't happen until December 6th. Starting January of 1866, there were still slaves working in 2 states. Kentucky, they didn't free their slaves till the year I graduated high school. And here's the one that'll floor you. New Jersey. New Jersey, they had some type of, where if you were born before this date, so there were still some very old slaves working in the fields in New Jersey when 13th Amendment was ratified and became law in the United States.
My understanding, Maryland was a border state. So,
Yes.
So the Federals didn't want Maryland to become part of the
Of course.
Confederacy. My understanding is that the Federals took all the elected officials, or a lot of the elected officials, and put them on a ship so they couldn't vote to secede.
They threw him in Fort McHenry prison. If you want to read a great book, the gentleman was his father was one of the biggest war heroes in the Revolutionary War, but 18 months or 14 months in an American Bastille. There were 2 U.S. congressmen, including one from Leonardton, who actually were thrown in jail. Congressman May from Baltimore was included in those roundups early in the war when they just threw, if anybody who knew how to spell secession. Fort McHenry. If you'd ever said Godspeed, God for Jefferson Davis, Fort McHenry.
So that's actually why Maryland didn't secede.
Yes, Maryland could not succeed. They did the same thing in Missouri. Kentucky had sort of tried to insulate themselves and said, as long as no troops come on our soil, we're not doing anything. And then both armies invaded them simultaneously. So,
But you gotta keep in mind that the Maryland governor at that time was not in favor of seceding.
oh yes, that's
So
very true
that-
too.
That had a lot of political influence.
And Thomas Hicks, both of our governors during the war were slave owners also. Thomas Hicks was from Dorchester County and would not let, and another thing that went against us, the Maryland legislature only met every other year, so it was an off year. And we had to call that special session. And, by that time, Butler had already invaded and taken over Annapolis, and the special session was in Frederick. And you had to get on a train and right through,
They were the same Butcher Butler from New Orleans.
That's the same General Butler from New Orleans. Came in and invaded Annapolis, basically occupied Baltimore with no orders whatsoever. And he was a politician. He just got thrown deep into the pool, but he did a fairly good job.
It was a good thing he came in Annapolis, because he landed at Annapolis Naval Academy, which was federal land.
Yes.
So the Maryland couldn't say you can't land.
Yeah. I did not think about that, but that is true. That is very true. Guys, I want to thank everybody who came. And be safe going home.